Hi there. Welcome to the Voices United Conference online. My name is Max Nolan, and I have the pleasure today to introduce our next session entitled Viewing Uncertainty as Opportunity Growth in the Time of COVID. Our fantastic presenter today is Leslie Moruza Drips. Leslie is the executive and artistic director of City Singers Youth Choirs in Richmond, Virginia. She teaches voice privately and is a published composer and performer with international commercial and film credits with her band Moruza. We are so happy to have her here today to share her wisdom with us at this really unprecedented time in our field. We hope you enjoy.
Hello and good day to you, fellow choir directors and music educators with ACDA. I am delighted to be here to share my ideas on how we can view uncertainty as opportunity and then thrive in this unusual time. My name is Leslie Moruza Drips, and I live and work in Richmond, Virginia. The purpose of this presentation is to walk you through some exercises to help you apply the principles of strategic planning to the near future. And so, of course, the principles of strategic planning involve identifying goals, identifying needs, applying metrics. If that sounds familiar, that's very similar to lesson planning. And so we're going to apply these principles to yourself, your program, your community, with some very specific questions attached to this process, which will help in turn to define the scope and the needs and all the things that end up being really gigantic question marks that feel like they're too big to tackle. But I have found in my experience as the executive director of my organization that going through this strategic planning process from sort of a bird's eye view of the whole program or community or goals is really helpful in defining goals that turn out to be not only attainable and actionable, but the doorway through which we go that leads to thriving. First, I'd like to discuss what sort of time we're in. Defining this as a time of uncertainty sounds dire, but it's actually helpful, because if we view this as a time of uncertainty, not recovery, that will affect what sorts of goals that we're setting in this time. I would argue that this entire next year, we will not be in recovery. We are in a time of uncertainty. We don't know what school will be like online. We don't know when school will be back in person. For school systems that are meeting in person, we don't know how long that will last. We don't know when a vaccine will be available or even if one will be available. We don't have enough data about singing in person to know whether it is responsible or completely safe. There's just a lot of uncertainty in this time, and that's okay. I think that by acknowledging that we are in a time of uncertainty, this is actually very helpful in helping us to understand what are reasonable expectations for this time period, and also understanding what's not reasonable. So we're in a time of uncertainty, not recovery. Recovery happens after the storm has passed. We are now in the midst of this storm. Reliable data and more than incidental experience are required to be in recovery, and we don't have those things right now. Given that we're in a time of uncertainty, how can I possibly argue that we can thrive now? It does feel like a really big question, doesn't it? But the exercises that we're going to do today will help us not only understand where we are, they're going to help us understand where we can be, and will also structure the questions that we're asking ourselves about ourselves and our programs, so that we can really well define the idea of thriving. And we'll get to that in a minute. So just as a little shot in the arm, We know singing is essential to human thriving. We have studied this. We have seen it over the course of, however many years you've been in the field. You know this to be a truth. It's demonstrable. It's experiential. We know it to be true. We know music empowers people to survive the most trying circumstances. A cursory glance at history shows that. A glance at our students' lives, our own lives, bear testimony to this truth. We know music to be core to our students' understanding of the world, and we know singing is good for our communities. So I would argue, how can we possibly thrive now? The answer is the singing arts are designed to enable human thriving in crisis. This very moment is what we've been training for. So, moving on. The first thing I'd like to do before we start the exercises is we're going to define some terms. So that includes who, what, where, how, and to what degree. A mixture of adjectives and adverbs in there for you grammar nerds. So our first question to answer before we get started on the exercises is who will thrive? So I have 3 spheres of thriving. We have individual thriving, that's you as a musician artist. We have program thriving, so that's your choir or your musical group, just kind of one more concentric circle out from you yourself. And then we have community thriving, and the community can include your school, it can include your school system, it can be your town or county or city. You really get to define what each of these things are, as long as you're thinking of them in ever increasing concentric circles of your influence. So who will thrive? We're going to be talking about thriving on an individual, program, and community level. The next question is what is thriving? So we're going to define thriving in a minute, but before that I want to lay some groundwork. This is stuff that can be very influential on how we set our goals, how stressful we allow goals to be in our lives, and how productive we can be in accomplishing our goals. So to thrive, I must first recognize elements that are outside my control. To thrive, I must identify elements which are within my control. You'll notice that there's some overlap between these circles. This can be very confusing for educators because it's very hard to separate out what things are within my agency and control and what are actually within another person's agency and control. To thrive, I must first let go of what's mine, not mine. And then I must cultivate what is mine. Now, this is important because as we define thriving, you will encounter many things that you want to thrive and that you want to grow and that you want to prosper, which are not actually yours to thrive and grow and prosper. And so we have to be okay with letting those pieces go and allowing the people in whose agency those things live to be in control of those things. Before we move on, I'd like you to take a moment and write down concerns, worries, and unknowns that you have going into September. After you've written this, I'd like you to assign who decides to each item. So this could be something that your student decides. So for example, will my program have enough numbers in the fall? Well, there are certain things that you can control that may influence numbers, but ultimately the decision to be in chorus rests with someone who is in you. Because I know that if choir directors were in charge of who would be in chorus, it would be compulsory, and we would make sure that everybody was in choir. So I know that it's not in your control. So that could be in your students' control. It could be in guidance counselors' control. It could be in parents' control, administrative control. So be ruthless here. Assign who decides to each item, each concern, worry, and unknown. We're going to pause for a minute and let you do that. Okay, now that you've written your list, we're going to talk about what thriving is actually. So we're going to define thriving. What is thriving? According to whatever dictionary I looked up, thriving has three aspects, which is to flourish, to prosper, or to progress. You'll see that flourish is further defined as growing vigorously. Prospering is further defined as gaining in wealth or possessions, and progressing is realizing a goal. Now, you may be thinking, a lot of this stuff a lot of these definitions have aspects of controlling things that I actually don't control. So if we're thinking about flourishing and growing vigorously, just as it affects, say, numbers in a choir program, that's actually not in your control. So what if we did this? One aspect of thriving is to flourish, which means to grow vigorously in ideas, presence, awareness, and scope. All of those things can be within your control. Or prospering would be to gain in wealth, possessions, and knowledge and skill. And then progressing would be to realize a goal despite or because of circumstances. And I love that little phrase, because of circumstances, because that really encourages us to look at our circumstances of uncertainty as an opportunity to thrive in a way that we haven't thought of before. Moving on, as we define terms, we're going to answer the question, where will we thrive? This defines our areas of operation. So these are kind of like areas of operation, exactly what I just said. So we have musical instruments, technology, and tools, and these are sort of arbitrary groups. You can make up your own groups as you're inspired. Repertoire, history, and cultures, people, and any additional skills or tools that occur to you. For my purposes, I'm going to kind of keep them in these three groups as we keep talking about thriving. Now we get to the question, how? And we're actually going to come back to this because this how question includes the exercises that we're going to do once I'm done defining terms. So how do we view uncertainty as opportunity and thrive? We have the three exercises that we're going to go through. We're going to answer the relevant questions, which are questions that are generated from who, what, where, how, and to what degree. These questions generate ideas and shape your options. We're going to identify the needs, which defines the scope of the work. So if one of my answers to the relevant questions was, I'm going to have a parade of singers on 25 elephants, and then I realize I need to get the elephants, that's a very different project than something else that doesn't require quite so many things that I need to assemble. So this identifying needs helps to define the scope of a work. And then the third exercise under this how element is to set a timeline, which creates the actionable plan for your idea. Our last sort of term that we're going to define is, to what degree will thriving be pursued? This helps us pare down and really define our ideas to an even finer point. So you have sort of these 3 degrees of pursuing thriving within a category. We have explore, which is to form questions. We have learn, which is to answer questions. And we have complete create, which is to apply answers. This is going to become really clear once we're actually putting together our questions. So here we are at exercise 1. We're going to ask the relevant questions. So we have who, where, and to what degree. So putting together these things that we discussed in the spheres of thriving, the areas of thriving, and the degrees of thriving, we have this kind of massive question, which is, what have I wished to explore, learn, or create as an individual, program, or community in areas of instruments, repertoire, or people? Now, in your handout, you have probably 81 questions that this one question can divide out to. So we have all sorts of combinations within this question. You do not have to answer all 81 questions. This is a way of sparking ideas in areas that maybe you haven't thought of before. So if I ask the question, what have I wished to explore as an individual artist in areas of instruments? For me personally, the answer to that is I have wanted to take voice lessons as a grown-up for a long time, and I just never have. And so one of the things that I committed to do in quarantine was to start taking voice lessons on Zoom, because as a mother who works at home and homeschools, the chances that I have to leave my young children and go take voice lessons are slim to none. And so, what I found in the time of COVID was that actually the opportunity for me to do that was greater because so many teachers were teaching online. So now you're going to take a moment and look at your handout of all these questions and just jot down some ideas that come to you as you read through them. All right, now that you have answered 5 questions, we are on to exercise 2, where we identify the needs that are included in your idea. So the way to go through this, I recommend, is looking at the ideas that you have and kind of categorize them according to big, medium, or small. And no idea is a small idea. This is just sort of shorthand, kind of a big framework project that could take the place of a semester concert that people could be working towards, that has an element of reward, an element of satisfaction and artistic excellence. A medium project might be a support project, so something that you are learning about as an individual that will in turn work to flourish or prosper your work. Or a small or pod project, which could be for students to carry out on their own. A project that you can assign to small groups of students that they can do. The second step that I recommend is to find a buddy. So one of the great opportunities that we have right now is that everybody is used to online meetings. So this opens the world to you in terms of collaborators. So there could be somebody that you work really well with in your district, or some, a choir director friend that you have over in Minnesota who you've always wanted to work with, reach out to that person, or post in the choir director's Facebook page that you're active in. Find someone who resonates with your idea, because collaboration generates so many good ideas, and you can also share work in a meaningful way, as an individual working on this project, or as a program, or as a community. I really recommend that you find a buddy. The third step in exercise 2 is to write your promo. And what I mean by promo is, if you could imagine that a really excited news person got a hold of your project and was so excited to find a choir director innovating in this crazy time, what would you want them to write their story about? This is a great way to fill in the details of your idea. So, as you're imagining the story being written and reading it, you can see what sorts of things would be really appealing to an audience or really appealing to your students. You can imagine a student being quoted in the story as saying, "This idea just gave me a purpose and really helped focus my musical studies," or whatever you want to fill it in. Writing a promo is a wonderful exercise for helping to fill in important details in your idea and helping you realize what additional needs you have to fill out your project. Number 4, identify possible collaborators and contact with them. Now, 4 is a little bit different from 2. The folks in 4 that I'm talking about are people that either you are paying to participate in the project, and you're sort of the boss and the person with the vision, or they're people who are volunteering under your overseeing energies. So these are people who might be guest musicians, or people who are going to give talks to your students on their folk music, or a voice teacher in the area who's going to come in and teach some sample lessons to your students, things like that. And folks who will come in on the project under your authority. And then, of course, the 5th one is identifying the materials that you need. So do you need sheet music? Do you need elephants? Do you need recorders? Do you need a big wall that your kids are going to do a mural on? All of those sorts of materials. So now that you have sketched out some rough ideas, we're going to work on identifying their needs. And the last portion of these exercises is to set a timeline for your project. The best way that I found to do this is I begin at the end. When do I want my project to be in hand and available for public consumption? You know, when it's a concert, it's kind of easy because we have the concert date. But for things that are online based or products that might look different from a concert, it's really helpful to know, do I want this to be available before the December holiday? If it's available before the December holiday, when do I need submissions from my students? Before that, when do the students need all the materials, right, in order for them to be working on the project? And then, of course, establishing student due dates. If you're in a school and they're being graded, you have some leverage here. You know, I find that I always have to leave in some wiggle room for student due dates because in my organization, you know, the students don't get grades from us. So I have to leave some wiggle room in there. So now take a moment and identify 3 due dates essential to your project. Remember to begin at the end. When do you want your product in hand or available to your students or the public? Included in your handouts are some sample ideas. These are things that I've considered for my own program or projects that I've seen other choral educators around the country and the world participating and piloting. None of these ideas are my own. Feel free to take them and change them and use them however you want. What my program is doing, we are working on a winter album project, and we've recruited some of the professional musicians in Richmond to collaborate and play and be featured soloists on the album. And our goal is to be able to do our entire semester and most likely the spring in a remote way, and have the kids record themselves at home using the processes that have become widely known for virtual choirs, but just in audio. So we've hired recording engineers to do the actual engineering and mixing and mastering. And right now we're in the process of writing the music that will be on the album. And so we've gone through this and all of these exercises ourselves, and it really helped to shape the scope of the project. For example, it's really unlikely that I will have 12 completed songs ready before the December break. My goal is more like 4. And I have to be okay with that, and then I have to be okay with continuing the work through the spring, and then, you know, having more like 11 songs that will be available for the following December holidays. Even more ideas. Here are resources that I have found helpful as I've developed our own projects. BandLab is a free app for a smartphone for multi-track recording, and it's available for both Android and Apple, and students can collaborate it between Android and Apple devices. So that can be something that you could get permission to use possibly from your school system. And then also there's MuseScore, which is the free music notation program, which I have found useful for my program my choirs, both for me writing music and also for encouraging students to make their own compositions. The software that I use to record this presentation is called OBS. It's free software from Windows and Mac, allowing screen and video recording in case you have a need for that. If you're interested in writing a promo for your idea, your project idea, and you want to see how it's done so you can actually release it, you can just Google how to write a press release. That blog.justreachout has a template that I have found to be helpful. And then you can kind of see what pivoting to a project like this and wording your pivot so that your students and parents can possibly also catch the vision of viewing uncertainty as opportunity. You can see how that can be done on my organization's website, which is citysingerschoir.org/FAQ. You can see what we've done that works, and you can also see areas that we need to grow in. And if you see those things, please email me because I'm always interested in people's feedback there. So now we're going to enter a time of Q&A. I'd love to, help you however I can. If you have ideas that you want feedback on or other questions, some of my prompting questions that I have experienced in my own journey of having difficulty with is my project idea within my area of control? Are there elements for which I can get outside help? What's the budget? That's a big one too. So I'm going to join you in real life in just a minute, and I look forward to hearing your ideas, and I hope that this was helpful to you. Have a great day.